Are you serious right now? You're going to talk to me like that in my courtroom? Deputy Mark Harlan let out a low laugh and shook his head as he stood beside the rail, one hand resting on his duty belt, the other holding a folder he had already stopped reading. The woman across from him kept her face calm. "Deputy," she said, "I asked you a direct question. Are you here for this hearing, or are you just wasting this court's time?" A few people in the gallery looked up. Harlan smirked. "Lady, I don't know who you think you are, but you don't get to tell me how to do my job." He said it loud enough for the room to hear. Then, with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having been corrected hard enough, he looked her up and down and added, "Maybe if you dressed like you belonged here, somebody would take you seriously." A few nervous laughs came from the back of the courtroom. One clerk lowered her eyes. Another officer near the door smiled like he had just watched something entertaining. The woman didn't move. She simply set her folder on the table, folded her hands, and looked toward the bench. Harlan had no idea he was talking to the judge assigned to his case, and he had no idea that in less than 10 minutes, the hearing he had mocked would become the reason his badge was about to be suspended. This story doesn't start here. Rewind. Judge Simone Carter had spent 19 years building her reputation in the state court system. At 52 years old, she was known for her discipline, her precision, and her refusal to let anyone turn her courtroom into a stage. She had worked her way through law school at night, raised 2 children alone after her husband died, and spent more than a decade on the bench, earning the kind of respect that could not be demanded, only deserved. On her desk at home sat a framed photo of her mother in a church hat, smiling with both hands wrapped around a Bible worn soft at the edges. Simone kept that photo in the same place every day. It reminded her why she never allowed herself to be careless with power. That morning, she had arrived at the courthouse early to review an evidentiary hearing in a civil rights case involving police misconduct, excessive force, and a disputed arrest report. The deputy assigned to security that day was Mark Harlan, a man with 11 years on the force, 6 citizen complaints, and a record that had been protected by supervisors who preferred obedience over accountability. Harlan had 2 commendations on his file: professional presence, strong control under pressure. He also had a pattern: 3 complaints for disrespectful language, 2 complaints for unnecessary physical contact, 1 complaint for threatening a civilian during a courthouse transport. Every one of them had been dismissed. Every one of them had been explained away. And now, he was standing in Judge Simone Carter's courtroom, deciding that a black woman in a dark suit could not possibly be the judge. At 9:17 a.m., the hearing began. At 9:19 a.m., Harlan interrupted the record. He stepped forward and said, "Before we waste time, I want the record to reflect that this plaintiff's witness has not been properly screened." The attorney on the other side looked surprised. "Deputy, she is the court." Harlan frowned. "No, she's not." The room went still. Simone glanced up from the file in front of her. "Deputy Harlan," she said evenly. "Step back." He hesitated, then gave a short, incredulous laugh. "No disrespect, but I've never seen you in chambers before." "You wouldn't have," she said. "You usually don't speak long enough to stay in the room." That line landed hard. One clerk almost smiled. Harlan's face changed, but only a little. He was still committed to the idea that this was a misunderstanding he could talk his way through. He pointed toward the bench. "Ma'am, I'm just trying to keep order here." Simone looked at him for a long second. Then she said, "You may keep order by returning to your post and allowing this hearing to continue." He didn't. Instead, he leaned back and muttered, "This is why the system gets nothing done." The attorney at the table sat forward. "Deputy, you need to stop talking." Harlan ignored him. He looked at Simone again and said, "You really ought to let an actual judge handle this." That was the moment the room shifted. Not because she raised her voice, because she didn't. Judge Simone Carter removed her reading glasses, placed them on the table, and said, "Deputy Harlan, approach the bench." He laughed first. Then he realized nobody else was laughing. The bailiff at the side wall had gone still. The clerk had stopped typing, and the attorney, who had been trying to keep his client composed, had now gone pale in a very specific way. Harlan took one step forward, then another. Then he saw the nameplate. Judge Simone Carter, his face changed so quickly it almost looked like a blink. The smile disappeared. The color drained from his cheeks. And for the first time since he had walked in, he looked at her like she was a person he should have studied before opening his mouth. She didn't give him the mercy of pretending it hadn't happened. "Deputy Harlan," she said, "do you know who I am now?" He swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor." "No," she said. "You knew who I was the moment you decided I didn't belong here." He had no answer for that. And now the hearing was no longer about the motion on the docket. It was about him. She ordered the transcript sealed, and then reopened the record under a separate administrative inquiry into conduct in the courtroom. Within minutes, the chief bailiff had been notified. By the time Harlan tried to explain himself, the court administrator was already reviewing prior complaints attached to his personnel file. And those complaints told a story. The first was from a defense attorney who said Harlan had mocked her in front of jurors. The second was from a public defender who said he had shoved a client's folder off a table. The third was from a grandmother who said he had called her confused when she asked for directions to the correct courtroom. The fourth came from a black mother who said he had told her to act like she'd been there before. The fifth and sixth were filed by courthouse staff who had learned it was easier to ignore him than challenge him. But what happened in Judge Carter's courtroom was different, because this time the person he mocked was the one signing the orders. At 9:28 a.m., she called for a recess. At 9:31 a.m., she requested Harlan's supervisor. At 9:36 a.m., she ordered a formal review of his conduct not only in the courtroom, but in every transport, arrest detail, and courthouse escort tied to his name over the last 4 years. Outside the courtroom, Harlan finally understood the shape of the wall closing in around him. Inside, Simone stayed composed. She did not humiliate him. She did not perform anger. She did not give him the comfort of seeing her shaken. She simply let the record do what the record was built to do. When the hearing resumed, she addressed the room in the same measured tone she had used for thousands of cases. "I will say this once," she said. "A uniform does not excuse disrespect. A badge does not authorize contempt, and this court will not tolerate an officer deciding who belongs in front of it." No one moved. No one spoke. Even the officer at the door kept his eyes down. Then she turned to Harlan and said, "You may leave the courtroom. Your assignment here is over." His lips parted like he wanted to object. He didn't, because now he knew. And everyone else knew too. Not just that he had insulted a judge. He had done it because she was a black woman, standing in a place where he assumed she had to be someone lesser. And that assumption had cost him everything. By noon, Harlan was placed on administrative leave. By late afternoon, the courthouse released the transcript of the exchange to the disciplinary panel. By evening, local media had picked up the story. By the next morning, his supervisors were answering questions about why 6 prior complaints had never led to meaningful action. Judge Carter did not give interviews from the bench, but she did issue a written statement. It said, in part, that the real danger in systems like this is not only the insult itself, but the comfort people feel while delivering it. That line spread fast, because everybody understood it. The deputy who laughed in court, expected her to be a bystander. Instead, she was the authority. He expected to mock a stranger. Instead, he insulted the person deciding his future. He expected a routine day. Instead, he walked into a hearing that exposed his habits to the one room where they could no longer be dismissed. That night, Simone returned home and set her files on the kitchen table. Her daughter asked her if she was angry. She thought about it for a moment. Then she said, "I'm tired of men like that, acting surprised when the room is not built for them anymore." Her daughter nodded because she knew exactly what that meant. Harlan's badge was suspended pending review. His name was removed from courthouse assignments. The judge on the case he had mocked ordered a full audit of the complaint history tied to his unit. And the officer who had laughed in the gallery was the same officer who later gave a statement admitting he had not realized she was the judge. That sentence did not help him. It only proved the problem. By the end of the week, Judge Carter had reassigned the case to a federal oversight docket and recused herself from the individual disciplinary, proceeding to avoid any question of conflict, though everyone in the building already knew what the conflict had been. It had been respect, or rather, the absence of it. On Sunday evening, Simone sat on her porch with a cup of tea and watched the last light leave the sky. Her mother's photo was still on the shelf behind her. Her phone buzzed once. A clerk from the courthouse sent a short message. The audit had started. She read it, set the phone down, and closed her eyes for a moment. She was not smiling. She was not celebrating. She was thinking about how many times people like Harlan had mistaken composure for weakness. Then she stood, picked up her tea, and went back inside. Because the next case was waiting. And so was the next person who needed to be reminded that dignity is not something a uniform gives out. Until the system changes, somebody has to be watching. If this story hit you, share it with someone who understands why respect should never depend on who you think a person is. What should happen when an officer insults the judge in her own courtroom?